Mama Juma was a legend in the bustling marketplace. Her meat stall was always the busiest, with people lining up before sunrise just to get a taste of her fresh cuts. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, her hands moving swiftly as she chopped and prepared the orders. The other butchers in the market struggled to compete. No one understood how she managed to sell so much meat every day. She never ran out, never closed early. Kwame was new in town, a traveler passing through. He had heard about Mama Juma's famous meat and decided to see for himself. The moment he tasted it, he knew something was different. It was softer, richer, unlike any meat he had eaten before. But something felt off. There was a strange smell, one that didn't belong, a scent that made his stomach twist. That night, as the market emptied, Kwame noticed something unusual. Mama Juma was still there, still working. Where was she getting all this meat from? One morning, a young girl named Amina vanished. She had been seen just the night before, laughing and playing with her friends near the marketplace. Now she was gone. Her parents searched everywhere. The villagers helped, calling her name, knocking on doors, combing the fields. But there was no sign of her. The only thing left was her red scarf, tangled in the bushes near the marketplace. The police arrived, asking questions, checking every stall. But there were no clues, no witnesses, no sounds in the night. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Kwame felt uneasy. He had seen Amina the previous evening, skipping past Mama Juma's stall. Had she passed by the butcher's hut? Had she seen something she wasn't supposed to? He watched as the old woman worked, her hands moving steadily, chopping, slicing, wrapping. The missing girl's face flashed in his mind, but he shook it off. No one would suspect Mama Juma. She was kind, generous, the market's beloved butcher. Kwame couldn't ignore the unease creeping into his chest. He started watching Mama Juma closely. During the day, she was all smiles, her laughter filling the air as she handed out fresh meat. But at night, something changed. One evening, long after the market had closed, Kwame found himself wandering past the stalls. The place was empty except for one flickering lantern. Mama Juma's stall. He saw her silhouette inside, bending over something heavy. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. A thick, iron scent filled his nose. Blood. Mama Juma was dragging a large sack across the ground, the bottom leaving a dark, wet trail behind it. Kwame's breath hitched. The sack was moving. A soft, muffled cry slipped through the fabric. Someone was inside. His heart pounded as he took a step back. He wanted to run, to scream, to stop her, but his feet wouldn't move. He watched as she disappeared into the shadows, the sack thudding heavily behind her. What had he just seen? The next morning, the market was alive again. People bustled around, buying and selling, as if nothing had happened. Kwame stood near Mama Juma's stall, watching her closely. She worked as usual, slicing meat, chatting with customers. But something was different. The night before, he had seen that sack. He had heard the muffled cries. But now everything looked normal. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. Kwame swallowed hard. He had to tell someone. But who would believe him? Mama Juma was respected, loved. He was just a traveler, a stranger in this town. If he accused her, they would laugh him out of the village, or worse. Still, the thought of that sack haunted him. What if someone else disappeared? What if Amina wasn't the only one? Kwame clenched his fists. He had to find out the truth. That night, Kwame couldn't sleep. The image of Mama Juma dragging that sack replayed in his mind over and over. He had to know what was inside. As the market closed and the last lanterns dimmed, he crept toward Mama Juma's hut. The door was slightly open, a dim light flickering inside. He hesitated. His heart pounded. Then he stepped forward. Inside, the room smelled of raw meat and something else. Something foul. The butcher's table was covered in blood-stained cloth. Hooks dangled from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the night breeze. A large wooden chest sat in the corner. Kwame's stomach churned. He stepped closer, reaching out, fingers trembling. Just as he was about to lift the lid, a shadow moved behind him. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, my child," a voice whispered. Kwame spun around. Mama Juma stood in the doorway, cleaver in hand, and she was smiling. Kwame's pulse pounded in his ears. Mama Juma's eyes gleamed in the dim light, her grip tightening on the cleaver. He took a step back, nearly knocking over a table. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something chilling underneath it. Kwame swallowed hard. He knew he had two choices: run or become one of her special cuts. Without thinking, he grabbed a wooden stool and hurled it at her. It smashed against the floor, buying him just enough time to dash past her and out the door. The night air was cold, but Kwame barely noticed. He sprinted down the empty streets, his legs shaking, his lungs burning. Behind him, the door to Mama Juma's hut creaked shut. She hadn't chased him. She hadn't shouted. She had just stood there, smiling. The next morning, Kwame went straight to the village elders. He told them everything: the sack, the blood, the butcher's hut, the cleaver, the missing girl. The elders exchanged glances. Then one of them sighed. "Son," he said, "Mama Juma has been feeding this village for years. She has helped the sick, given food to the poor. Do you really expect us to believe she's a murderer?" Kwame's heart sank. "Go to her hut," he pleaded. "You'll see." The elders agreed, but when they reached Mama Juma's place, it was spotless. No blood, no wooden chest, just a neat, tidy home that smelled faintly of spices. Mama Juma stood in the doorway, hands folded. "Is something wrong?" she asked sweetly. The elders shook their heads. "This boy must have had a nightmare." Kwame's stomach twisted. Mama Juma met his gaze and winked. A week passed and another villager went missing. This time it was a merchant, a man who had just arrived in town. He had been last seen near the marketplace, near Mama Juma's stall. Kwame knew it wasn't a coincidence. He watched from a distance as Mama Juma worked, smiling and serving fresh meat as if nothing had happened. But something was different. Her stall had more meat than usual. She never ran out. Never. That night, Kwame made up his mind. If no one believed him, he would get proof himself. Kwame waited until the market was deserted before sneaking toward Mama Juma's hut. He pressed his ear against the door. Silence. Then, a rustling sound. He pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The wooden chest was back, but this time it wasn't closed. Inside were bones. Human bones. Kwame covered his mouth to stop himself from screaming. He turned to leave, but a floorboard creaked beneath his foot. Mama Juma's voice cut through the silence. "You're becoming a problem, Kwame." Kwame ran. Mama Juma moved faster than he expected. He could hear her footsteps behind him, soft but steady. He darted through the market, knocking over crates and baskets in his rush. He reached the village square and gasped, "Help!" But no one was there. The town was asleep. Then, the footsteps stopped. Kwame turned back. Mama Juma was gone. The next morning, an old woman pulled Kwame aside. She looked afraid. "You're not the first to suspect her," she whispered. "Many have over the years. They all disappeared." Kwame's blood ran cold. "Why does no one stop her?" he asked. The woman's hands trembled. "Because she isn't human." Kwame sat with the old woman, his hands shaking. "You're saying she's not human?" The woman sighed, glancing around as if someone might be listening. "Not anymore," she whispered. Kwame frowned. "Then why won't anyone stop her?" The woman hesitated. "Because they're afraid." She lowered her voice. "This has happened before. A long time ago, another butcher. People started disappearing, and those who spoke up vanished next. The villagers learned to stay quiet. They learned to look the other way." Kwame's throat tightened. "You mean they know? They suspect?" The woman's eyes were sad, but they're too scared to confirm it. Kwame clenched his fists. "Then I'll show them the truth." The next morning, Kwame gathered his courage and tried to speak to the villagers. "Listen to me," he pleaded, stopping a group of merchants. "Mama Juma, she's not who you think she is. I saw what's inside her hut. There are bones. Human bones." The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. One scoffed. "Stop this nonsense." Kwame stepped closer. "I'm serious. Where do you think she gets all that meat? She never runs out." A woman shushed him, looking over her shoulder. "Don't say such things aloud. If she hears you—" "Then what?" Kwame snapped. "She'll make me disappear next?" Silence. The villagers turned away. One by one, they walked off, pretending not to hear. Kwame stood alone. His heart pounded. They knew something was wrong, but fear had silenced them. Kwame spent the next few days observing the market. If the villagers wouldn't listen, he needed another way. Then he noticed a pattern. Every night, a young boy named Malik worked late, sweeping the market stalls after everyone left. Kwame approached him. "Hey, do you ever see Mama Juma at night?" Malik hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "I think she's hiding something. Something bad." Malik glanced around nervously. I saw her carrying something last week." His voice dropped. "A big sack. It was dripping." Kwame's stomach turned. "Did you tell anyone?" The boy shook his head. "My mother told me never to speak about her." Kwame crouched down. "If I prove she's dangerous, will you help me?" Malik hesitated, then nodded. Kwame had his first ally. Kwame couldn't storm into Mama Juma's hut alone. He needed proof. That night, he and Malik hid near the market. They waited and waited. Then, movement. Mama Juma stepped out of her stall, dragging a heavy sack, the same kind Kwame had seen before. He whispered to Malik, "Follow me." Carefully, they stalked her through the shadows. She walked toward the outskirts of the village, to an old abandoned well. Kwame's heart pounded. What was she doing? From behind a tree, Kwame and Malik watched as Mama Juma unfastened the sack. A hand slipped out. Kwame nearly gasped out loud. It was a person, a girl. She wasn't moving. Mama Juma grabbed the body and threw it into the well. A dull splash echoed into the night. Kwame clutched Malik's arm. "We need to go, now." Malik's face was pale with terror. "We have to tell someone." Kwame nodded. But who? The villagers wouldn't listen. They needed someone with power. The village chief was an old man, respected but weary. When Kwame burst into his hut the next morning, breathless and shaking, the chief frowned. "You again?" Kwame didn't care. "I saw her last night. She dumped a body into the well." The chief's eyes darkened. "You expect me to believe that?" Malik stepped forward. "It's true. I saw it too." The chief studied them. "Why would she kill people?" Kwame hesitated. "I don't know, but she's been feeding them to us." The room fell silent. The chief's expression changed. Doubt flickered across his face, then fear. "Take me to the well." Kwame led the chief and two guards to the old well. "Look inside," Kwame said. The guards hesitated. Then one threw a torch into the darkness. The flame illuminated the horror. Bones, flesh, skulls, all piled at the bottom. The chief staggered back. His face turned pale. He looked at Kwame. "I believe you." The chief gathered his strongest warriors. That night, they surrounded Mama Juma's hut. Kwame stood at the back, heart racing. The chief shouted, "Mama Juma, come out!" Silence. Then, the door creaked open. Mama Juma stepped out, calm as ever. She smiled. "Good evening, Chief." The warriors hesitated. Something felt wrong. Mama Juma's eyes were different. They were black, completely black. Kwame whispered, "She's not human." Mama Juma smiled wider. "Finally, you understand." Then, she moved, faster than any human should. The warriors attacked, but Mama Juma was stronger. Blades didn't cut her. Arrows didn't pierce her skin. She laughed, a deep, unnatural sound. Kwame grabbed Malik's hand. "We have to run." The chief's voice rang out. "Burn the hut!" Flames erupted. Smoke filled the air. Mama Juma's smile never faded. As the fire spread, her eyes locked onto Kwame. "You can burn my home," she whispered, "but you cannot burn the hunger." And with one final scream, she vanished into the smoke. The next morning, her stall was gone. But months later, in another village, a new butcher arrived. An old woman, smiling, her meat perfectly fresh. And that night, someone went missing.